Chapter 2, Section 10, The Presidency, Changing Roles, Part 1. The nature of the president's role has changed over time. In particular, the scope of the president's power has gradually expanded despite efforts by Congress and the Supreme Court to limit the president's authority. Constitutional origins. For many of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention, one of the more significant defects of the Articles of Confederation was its lack of a single executive officeholder, separate from the legislative branch, who could serve as the nation's de facto political and diplomatic leader. At the same time, however, the delegates had to balance their desire to remedy this defect against the concern that consolidating power within a single authority would eventually lead to the establishment of an American monarchy, exactly the type of government they were seeking to avoid. The idea of having a U.S. president who serves as a single executive was a contested subject when the American political system was being decided. One of the most notable arguments for the creation of a single executive was made by Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 70. Hamilton reasoned that it would be safer to vest the executive power in one person than in a group of people, because one person could not easily conceal mistakes by blaming co-executives, leading to greater accountability and an incentive for the executive to work to maintain the public's trust. Hamilton also contended that a single leader would have the energy required for the role, because this individual would be able to act quickly and decisively without the need to confer with others. As a result, Federalist 70 is often cited as justification for the expansion of presidential authority, especially in times of war or other crises. Ultimately, the delegates opted to create the office of the presidency, a single executive authority with a limited role in the legislative process, who would serve as a nation's commander-in-chief and who, with the consent of the Senate, would appoint judges and other officials to assist with faithfully executing federal law. In order to protect the presidency from corruption or other undue influences, including those that might cause the presidency to devolve into a monarchy or dictatorship, the framers established the following constitutional restraints on the office. Presidential terms are 4 years, and presidents who wish to serve longer must seek re-election. Presidents are not elected by popular vote, but are instead chosen by the Electoral College, which is made up of representatives selected by each state and which the framers intended as an additional check on the president's power. Presidents must be natural-born citizens and must have actually lived in the United States for at least 14 years prior to seeking office. The intent was to limit the potential for inappropriate foreign influence. Expansions of presidential power. The scope of the president's authority has expanded significantly since the Constitution was initially adopted. The framers did not trust a single powerful leader and made almost all executive powers contingent on congressional involvement. But over time, presidents have found justifications for acting unilaterally, often during a war or other crisis. For example, during the early days of the Civil War, President Lincoln suspended the writ of Habeas Corpus, a legal mechanism used by people who have been arrested or imprisoned to petition a court for their release. As a result, federal prisoners could be held indefinitely without trial. The suspension of habeas corpus was challenged by a prisoner of war, and a court of appeals held that Lincoln's actions were unconstitutional, on the grounds that only Congress is permitted to suspend habeas corpus. Lincoln ignored the ruling, arguing that it was necessary and constitutionally appropriate for him to have acted in light of the urgency of the situation, especially since Congress could not safely convene due to the war. Ultimately, Congress agreed and passed the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act of 1863, which authorized the president to suspend habeas corpus as he deemed necessary for the duration of the war. Several subsequent presidents, most notably Ulysses S. Grant, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and George W. Bush, have also suspended habeas corpus with congressional authorization to varying degrees of legal and political success. Other prominent examples of the expansion of presidential power include authorizing the military to engage in protracted armed conflicts without a formal declaration of war from Congress, such as during the Vietnam War, issuing greater number of executive orders that affect substantive policymaking, and creating special commissions that expand the investigative functions of the bureaucracy beyond those authorized by Congress.